So beyond page 258, in the sixth chapter on how to generate the higher and higher level of altruism to be of benefit to others and oneself, so that neither fall into the extreme ways, which is quite even highways, very well pitched road, they have to put these big blocks on either side so that people don't go off, So it's a person who is on the road of life often takes small wrong steps and find themselves often on the extreme, falling into the precipice, either mostly through their thoughts and the wrong view, and often also as a result of the former two by the unscrupulous conduct, which karmic sufferings people find themselves are mainly because they went extreme righteous or reactive or negative, whichever ways they took the way that were far harmful for themselves and others. So the whole subject of the book, Entry to the Middle Way, is how to bring the consciousness, how to resuscitate this lost consciousness and become aware of the steps one should no longer take anymore, but one should instead withdraw from those aggressive, righteous thoughts, attitudes, behaviors, with the help of meditating on the profound, blissful teachings of the panacea of the Dharma, by meditating on the middle way. Meditating means being with the way of the Buddha, taking refuge, really. Taking refuge means actually doing and thinking and predisposing that is safe from the danger of falling into the precipices. And so Chandrakirti has been highlighting the need to know the right and wrong views, and he's been talking about that on many different levels, and we are on verse number 119, top of page 259, but actually in terms of outline-wise, this is the fourth one, which is instructing to analyze the view, analyze the right view, analyze the views, but without becoming analysis of the view, becoming cause of attachment to your right view and aversion to the other people's so-called wrong view. When you are all that, then again it's not the middle way. Middle way. So, because even the right view is taught to reduce attachment and aversion. So if you have the right philosophical view, but you get attached to one's own view and aversive and saying other is wrong, then of course it's almost defeat the purpose. Some dialectics appears to get in the way, and they have to each have to remind this next verse. They say they quote this next verse when they're looking like attached to their views and very angry at others. Then they usually quote this next verse. So since Chandrakirti has not analyzed with attachment and hatred, he has instructed others to do likewise. Chandrakirti may have been very, 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 very blunt in his rejection of the extreme views, but he has highlighted, because he has never engaged in debate to prove others wrong and then feel victorious, and he get some status or banner or something. In the old tradition, they say when the winning debater, he gets 13 canopies or something. And the other one loses all the 30. It's like a token in the gambling. So you win, the other one loses all his 13 canopies, and then you win all the canopies. You say, hooray, I'm victorious. So Chandrakirti is reminding, he didn't do any debating for that reason. Therefore, he's highlighting that neither should people who become very carried away understand the right view, but shouldn't develop this attachment to the right view, because even attachment to right view is a wrong conduct. Wrong conduct. Remember, the view was to help with the conduct. If the conduct has been harmed by the wrong view, obviously there is no harmony. So that's why. Next verse goes address that. And the rangi dala chatan teshin tu shenji dala trugan tokpa ni teshin docha kondo namsal te namjupani nyuto tower yurus. So attachment to one's own beliefs, the teaching on the middle way, whatever you understood, avoiding the four extremes, aversion to another's views, what are other people's views of eternalism or nihilism, or whatever rigid view they may care to hold, and you have every dialectical reason to prove them wrong. If you have the aversion to the other view, all this is taught. Once clinging and aversions are dispelled through reason and analysis, we will be swiftly freed. So what he's really saying is one must always analyze things, but not with aim of being attached to one's own right view. This applies to whether religious or other views and opinions. I think this is relevant to people who are, even in everyday life, they're just so attached to their view, and when some people, because of their view, they just don't want to give in anything, so they just walk off the friends' ways, and they just don't have any alternative view because they're so attached to their rigid view. And they're not better with the view now, they're worse with the view. So that's what it's talking about. It's not just philosophical views, just whatever opinion. Whether you have a big quarrel with your brother or sister or whoever it is, it's because you're attached to your views. You didn't relax. You should still not lose the brother in it, with the right view. Because, brothers are very few, Whatever. We must analyze impartially and correctly with detachment. If we do this, we will swiftly attain liberation. This is the instruction given to the followers. So Chandrakirti is saying that no matter how good your views are intellectually, whatever, you should not get attached to this, because if you get attached to this, it will hold you back. So therefore, one must remove any aversion to other people's views or views that you disagree in, but even that is just for the necessity of learning how to debate and try to analyze, how to clarify, but not prove who's right and who's wrong. But what from the exercise did you learn? It's just an assignment, I suppose. We should do that. With this, we have now completed explaining the benefit of realizing interdependent origination free from extremes, and it completes the explaining interdependent origination through selflessness of phenomena. So this text discusses the selflessness of phenomena first, and then discuss the selflessness of person later. So that's why we are now at quite an important junction. There are two kinds of selflessness. Selflessness, meaning the selflessness of person, and selflessness of phenomena. So here, selflessness of phenomena means things, anything, from matter to consciousness. Selflessness of person is that I or me, that there's these two. So far we have dealt with the Choedak. Choedak is the Tibetan word for selflessness of phenomena. Now we come to discuss Canrakirti, selflessness of the person. The Tibetan word for person is Gangzak. Gang is he who, Zak means falls, he who falls. So basically means deluded person. All deluded persons seem to fall off. Very few take off. Or fall off and never recover. Hardly recover. Tibetan words are very beautiful. I don't know what the Sanskrit means. Do you know? Putgal. What does it mean? No etymological meaning. Yeah. Because Gang is he who, Sak means who falls, you know. He who falls, she who falls, you know. So it means human, just human. Means humans. Human means who have a tendency to fall off quite a lot of times. He learns to run, he learns to leap, but he eventually falls. Yeah, Kangsaki Dame. But this is very good news. No, who falls? No one who falls. So what's you worried? You need the emptiness of the one who falls. You're so aversive that you fell and you didn't flew all the time. So this is to save us from thinking I am me and therefore not able to make peace with the falls and things like that. So we have to meditate on the emptiness of self, and later on fails and succeeds. You know, if we can still succeed what we do, but it's not independently by ourselves. We are propped up in many other things. The number one who succeeds, who wins the Australia Open or something, he win because he defeated. You know, the other one doesn't take the defeating role. He is no independent winner. He can't play against himself. Maybe he can. Maybe he can. So there's no truly exists, no independent winner, no independent winner. There's only a dependent winner, you know. They call it runner-up. So without a runner-up, there's no number one, no winner, you see. So the runner-up was pretty close, you know. Pretty close. Only one game. Sometimes only one game, but only 1 point. So it's that close. Split of a second. There's not much there. So, but yet they think it's truly existing. So here we will look at Shukit Kansagi Dharma. This is two subdivision. First, purpose of negating the object of self-grasping. Yeah, what is the purpose of negating the object of self-grasping? Second is reasoning to negate the self itself. Of this, first is the purpose of negating the object self-grasping, and shown by next verse number 122. Now in Tibetan, these are beautiful. I don't think they'll sound as good as that in English, because nothing is truly existing, I suppose. So we have the perceiving that all faults and afflictions flow from the idea of the transitory composite. Now, this transitory composite is the translator's choice of the words for aggregates, you know, aggregates. When aggregate, Tibetan words for aggregates is jig tsok. Jig means transient, tsok means collection, transient collection. Composite is quite okay, transient composite, transient collection, transient composites. Meaning that everything is composites. Everything is comprised of many things. Compounded, that's the word. Compounded aggregates is a good word. Compounded aggregates. So that's the between form, feeling, all these five aggregates, form, feeling, perception, volition, consciousness, are all 5 types of the transient collection. So it's perceiving that all faults and afflictions flow from the idea of transitory, not just really idea of transitory collection, but viewing the transitory collection as real, as a non-transitory, you know, as non-transient, you know? Because there's a conception about the form being real and permanent and independent when they're actually composite. Yeah, so composite is the word that teaches that everything is compounded, you know, compounded aggregates. It's very good to remember that. When we don't remember things are compounded aggregate, we think that these I don't know this. What do we call this? So it needs a name first of all. It can see that's how the composite it is. Without a name, it isn't a thing. Even with a name, it's a bit hard. You can call this gong beater. Yeah, but it doesn't beat the gong at all. So it's a piece of bamboo and then a little rubber there, and this together. It doesn't beat the gong at all. Simple as that. It's just but if someone else's hand holds it, and then hit it on a gong, but not on a paper. On hitting on a paper, it doesn't beat the gong. So there is no really independently producing gong beater that beat the gong. It has to have a gong. Even the gong and gong beater are so close like this, still no gong beating. Still no gong beating. It is absent of many other composites. Yeah. So therefore, whenever you feel something, feeling is a feeling or sound. Everything arises as a result of this. So knowing that all faults, karmic faults, emotional faults, that we commit, is because we have this notion of I am my body. I am body. People don't hesitate. They say my body. They don't think about the who's my. They think that my is possessed and there is a possessor. So this concept, the idea of transitory collection, and knowing that its focus is the very self. Yeah. So because it's my body, my feeling. So that's the focus. This self is what the yogis will disapprove. So the yogis, meditators, only meditators who meditate on the middle way, and really hears what Nagarjuna and Chandrakirti and other masters saying, and then they realize that this meditation on the middle way is to not conceive aggregates as self and permanent and real. Ordinary people do the exact opposite. They actually do. I am my body. They just become so. So we have, this is the purpose of negating the object of self-grasping. Or what is the object? Object the self grasps to is the aggregates. So we have to first negate the aggregate and not being self. So we have to distinguish the object to negate, and once you negate each of the objects are negated, then they wouldn't much easier to deal with. Therefore, the purpose of negating the self is not to despise oneself. So therefore, most people misunderstanding the teaching of emptiness, thinking emptiness of self is like as if we're despising oneself. It's a denying self. We're not denying the temporary existence of self. We're talking about how to go skillfully so that we do not, become so rigid in thinking truly exists self. It's not to despise oneself, but to show that self-grasping view is the result of having a self as the observed object. So one actually thinks there is an object, so-called self, entity that it exists from its own self, unitarily existing, independently existing, and inherently existing. So that's the wrong view. Terminology used to describe this is the view of transitory collection. So we view transitory collection as not transitory collection, but as self. Yeah. So instead of viewing self, the transitory collection, they view it as self. This means grasping at the collection of aggregates as the self. Yeah. We don't even discuss, we don't even go to school that let's do this, but everybody innately thinks that. out of this arise all the delusion of samsara, such as hatred, attachment, and all the faults, such as impermanence. Impermanence is not a fault, but when things change, we resist. For instance, our resistance to change is because we wanted to stay as one is truly existing, permanently existing. So because of that, we basically resist. Yeah, we resist impermanence. If we don't resist impermanence, then and no self, then it's no. Yeah, just like a river, it flows from one country to another. No attachment to Australia, no attachment to Queensland. Goes to New South Wales, goes to New South Wales, goes into the ocean. It's very selfless river. Well, of course we can. Otherwise, Chandrakirti wouldn't have spent all this time writing this.
Do we have to become enlightened before we can do that?
No, I think we do incrementally like that. Some things are easier to let go than others, but when you understand this view, then it will give you wings to do that. Because we don't have the right view, then we just get attached to the wrong things. Birth and death and becomes problem, not because birth and death is a problem, but because when we have no birth, we want to have birth. And when we birth, we say, "Oh, that was terrible." And then first they didn't want a birth, and then they want a birth. And when they have birth, they complain about birth. And then when the birth, then it's old age, the sickness, and they complain about that. So they don't realize these are all dependent on many factors. So because why? Not because there's birth and death, that's a problem. Because there's grasping to the notion, wrong view, that I'm permanent, I'm body, I don't want to grow old, I'm going to want to sick. Sickness is not a suffering. Rejecting it is. Even without any sickness, life has enough sufferings. Because we are resisting, we're rejecting things. Because we're grasping to feelings as real and me. And so, therefore, self-grasping must be eliminated. So the object to negate is self-grasping. Self-grasping is not only philosophically wrong, but emotionally and behaviorally, it is cause of most people's problem. When two people are having problem with each other because both are self-grasping. Some people thought, yes, other was the people problem. They can go on their own. But then they realized they also had their own self-grasping with them wherever they went. So they keep having the same problems wherever they go because there's self-grasping everywhere. They're traveling with self-grasping. Self-grasping is like the toothbrush. They always take the self-grasping with it. So self-grasping must be eliminated. I don't know who will eliminate it. Self wouldn't eliminate it. Maybe Chandrakirti can help. That's the whole thing. That's what he prayed. He prayed that in order to help people out of compassion, he pay homage. May people understand this, then they might assist themselves, not have so much addiction to their self so much. Addiction to the self is the real problem. Buddha was so adamant in his view of saying no self. Was such an important, not just because there were other views that were against it, but he sees how that is causing all the sufferings. In order to abandon self-grasping, one must abandon the observed object of self-grasping. So we have to reject the object to which the self-grasping is mistaking it as self. Yeah, mistaking itself or they as self, mistaking those things as self. So that's whenever we want to get rid of the result, we always have to go to the source. Yes, so Buddha said the suffering must be stopped, but suffering is the result. If you don't want the result, you have to stop the cause of the result. The cause is self-grasping. Now this is real Buddhism, talking about understanding, have faith in a cause and effect. If you don't know the cause of it, no matter how much you despise and dislike the effect, you don't know how to uncause it. So we have to go to the source, True origin of suffering is self-grasping. Only when we eradicate the source, we can eliminate a result conclusively. Yeah. It's not people, not things, not place, not events that are the cause of the problem. They're concomitant causes. The root cause is self-grasping, Like the gong, like the gong and the drum beater and all these things are just a small parts in the puzzle, But the main thing is the grasping, whoever grasps to it, So that is why in the teachings on the Four Noble Truths, Buddha first of all said the suffering must be known. Yeah. And then the source of suffering should be abandoned. Yeah. So one must first know the suffering. What we do? We don't want to know. We deny suffering. We think life shouldn't have suffering. When we deny that, we fail to know it, and as a result of that, we negate suffering. We just very negative to suffering. Even suffering doesn't truly exist. If you really wanted to hear the teaching, even suffering doesn't. Really? Where did I get all these sufferings? Yeah, that's the problem. Yeah, that's right. That's right. We have to open our eyes. Right now we are closing our eyes. We're not looking with the real, because that's let there be light, I call it. Until you have this inkling, until you have this awakening, there is this. You don't want suffering, but you just find that all the time. So he didn't say the suffering should be abandoned, He says suffering must be understood. So it's amazing, kind of what you do with suffering is more important. When you try to defeat suffering, when you're fighting with suffering, people suffer more. But when you try to understand suffering, they want you to understand what is the cause of this suffering, this illness. So all the education department from preschool all the way to postdoctoral studies all try to understand things, why there are these problems. Buddha Dharma is early, it is all about that. Of course we don't want any suffering, but we can't cut it off just like that directly. We have to discover the source of suffering and eliminate that. Not knowing the source of suffering is a suffering, really suffering. So avidya means absence of knowing. Vidya means knowledge. The Vedas in all tradition, India, Vedas means knowledge. So people who study the Vedas, they know things, So teachings of Buddha is even more, It really informs you. So it removes the avidya, it removes the ignorance. This text is very useful tool to understand that. In the same way, we can't struggle directly with self-grasping. You have to first negate the self. The term yogi we were talking about in that verse, the yogi is usually used to refer to realized beings. Realized beings means yogis have changed their views from their deluded karmic perception that they used to have. They had enough. They have been tortured enough by their karma and affliction. So the yogis have just removed the yoke, removed the big thing on their shoulder, and they just untied. They just let themselves loose. They're liberated. Yeah, yogis are realized beings who are on the bhumis, and sometimes also in the ordin, also sometimes also to ordinary meditators. So depending to, you will say if you're a practitioner of Dharma for a reason, it's because when you're practicing, there's the opportunity for you to let loose the button. So if you have 3 buttons very tight, at least you lose 1 button. You've got a bit of breathing space. You do the second and breathing very good. The third one is tiniest one. It's very difficult to find. You see, so sometimes we are on the path because of that. We are on the path because we know the Dharma means is so true, and only we can dispose accordingly. Here, the term is used, that yogi, for those who are in the process of meditation or those who are meditators in the general way. So that because you can have yogis on a many different levels. Path of accumulation, path of preparation, path of seeing, and so on. So yogi could be many different levels of practitioners. This is because beings who are highly accomplished will have already eliminated self-grasping. So those who are advanced practitioners, they would have no self-grasping. It is those who are in the process who need to negate the self in order to eliminate self-grasping. So this is for those who still haven't apprehended how ferocious this self-grasping is as the true origin of sufferings. Yeah, it's very, very powerful to know that self-grasping is the suffering. It is the root cause of all suffering. It is one which ties you, blindfolds you. It is the one which doesn't allow you to do or say that is kind and compassionate ones when you really want to, but it doesn't allow you because you're self-grasping completely, just totally curse you. Yeah. So the purpose of negating object of self-grasping is shown here. So we have to therefore apprehend self-grasping as the root cause of suffering. Of course, if you know the root cause of suffering, then you can abandon. You can abandon if you know. You can only get rid of when you know which is to be abandoned. So reason. So reasoning. Now, second is the reasoning to negate the self. This is, of course, very big topic. Has three subdivisions. First is negating substantial person through reasoning. Second is establishing independently imputed person. So now these are very systematic way of looking at it. Third is applying this style reasoning to all entities. Yeah. So when you're able to do that, then you can apply that, with everything. So of this, first one which is negating substantial person through reasoning, has two subdivision. Negating the existence of person as a 5 alternatives. And second is negating the inexpressible person. Of these two, the first, negating the existence of a person as a first 5 alternative, has also two subdivisions. First, explaining at length the reason for negation, and second, presenting the definitive number of self-grasping in summary. Of these two, the first presenting the explaining at length the reason of negating has 4 subdivisions. First, negating the existence of self as a separate from aggregates. That's the most important one. Most people lump this together. So negating the existence of self as identical to the aggregates, but we mistakenly think they are identical. And the second is negating existence of a self as identical to aggregates. The first one is separate. Second is identical. Third one is negating them both separate and identical as support and supported. And fourth, negating the self as possessing the aggregates. So this is very thorough. Yeah, and this is why Chandrakirti's writing is very, very important to learn step by step. First is negating the existence of self as separate from aggregates has 2 subdivisions. First is presenting the notion, the concept itself, and secondly, presenting the criticism to think the existence of aggregate as separate from self as aggregate from aggregates. Yeah, self as separate from aggregates. First, presenting the notion of presenting theory is shown by one verse. We're dealing with this in the same way as we dealt with production. Previously, we talked about production of phenomena. So here, how the self is unconsciously produced as if it exists independently. In order to reach the conclusion of proving no production at all, production of self here, we dealt with theories such as production from self, production from other, and so on. In the same way, in order to negate the self, we must now destroy all the theories that support the existence of a self. One of these theories is that the self exists as something separate from the aggregates. So there is a concept thinking self actually exists as separate from the aggregates, and aggregates are possessions, and self is the possessor. This is the idea. So that is the first, because when they separate, it says the self as the possessor, and aggregate is the possessed. So we must negate the existence of self as separate from aggregates. Which schools subscribe to this view? So this is asking the question. There was many schools. This brings us to the first verse dealing with presenting the notion. So the notion is 사보땅 치포 민베다. 연대 제제 무대 남기도 대예 중세 라틴 무대 남 제남 룩데 타데인규. Yeah, so there's 5 things we were talking about, 5 alternatives. The non-Buddhists hold the self is what it experiences. So, second is that it is permanent. Third, it does not create. Fourth, it is devoid of gunas, means qualities. Fifth, it is devoid of activities. So these are 5 characteristics. With minor variation on this single theme, the heathens separate themselves in different schools. So the commentary comes here. This verse refers to the idea of ancient Indian school. I don't think it's Hindu school. It's Indian school, because Hindu wasn't ancient. The word Hindu is very modern. Indian schools, such as Sankhya and Vaisheshika and Veda and so on. In these Indian schools, it is these Indian schools that believe in the true existence of Atma, the soul or self, separate from aggregates. So they believe there's so-called Atma, this imperishable Atma. Your physical body may die, your name may die, but there's an imperishable Atma. There are some Buddhist schools who also believe the existence of self, but they accept that self as identical to the aggregates, which we will be dealt later. So here we are dealing with the theory that there is truly existing self separate from the aggregates. First, we will focus on the theory of the Sankhya school. They are saying that self is something that possesses 5 characteristics. So those 5 characteristics we talked about. The 5 characteristics are referred to in the verse. The first is self as an experiencer. It's not just Sankhya school. We also have this feeling. Oh, I'm experiencing this. The experiencer seems to be there complaining. For me. Experiencer. Which experience the result of actions of whoever, So that's the... Within a person, there is somebody who does the actions and somebody who experiences the results. The one who experiences the result is the self. That's this first theory. Therefore, the first character of self is as an experiencer. Now, you don't have to be Sankhya school follower. Everybody has this. Everybody naturally have this feeling. I'm me. I feel cold. I feel hurt. I feel unloved. I feel totally ignored. This experience. The second characteristic is permanent. Unfortunately, these are wrong views, And they not only think it's them who's experiencing this, but the same person is experiencing this. Permanent. Third characteristic is that it is a non-creator, Yeah, it's a non-creator. This meaning that self is receiving all these things. You didn't do anything. You didn't create anything. It just happened to me. See, this amazingly, these are some of the fundamental cores of wrong views. If it is an experience, if it enjoys the result, doesn't it also create an action, the karma? So this is Buddhists asking the question to the Sankhya. Yeah? The Sankhya school say no. They say no. According to this school, the one who creates the action is Prakriti. Prakriti is the nature. It's just the nature of things. They present 25 dharmas. We had the beginning of the text talking about the 25 characteristics. 25 prakritis. Prakriti means nature. Prakriti is the creator of action, and the self or Atma is the experiencer of the results. So sabot tango chepo mimpe dak. This is the first line in Tibetan. Sabot tango chepo mimpe dak. Sabo actually means eater, one who eats it, one who experiences it, experiencer. Tak means permanent. And Chepo means the doer. He's not the creator. He's not the creator. So those five factors are referred to are non-creator. Yonten chame. Yonten chame means he doesn't have any qualities. The fourth characteristic they ascribe to self is that it is without qualities, devoid of gunas, and fifth is that is without activity. So it doesn't do anything by itself. It all happens to him. Without qualities is a reference to the theory of Vaisheshika school. This is another Indian school which believes in 9 qualities, including feelings of sorrow, happiness, different types of perception, 9 qualities, and all possessed by the self. But in the case of Sankhya school, the qualities, feelings, and so on are not possessed by the self. The self is without these qualities and without activity. The example of activity includes stretching out the hand and pulling it back, and so on. Self also lacks this kind of activity or kyangkum. Kyangkum means stretching and bending. So it is experiencer, permanent thing, and non-creator without qualities and activities. So these are the 5 things. These are the 5 characteristics ascribed to this self, imputed by Tirthika. Tirthika means heretics. Sankhya is just one of those many schools who happen to hold these kind of rigid views. What they think is the characteristic. The non-Buddhists are divided into 5 categories: Sankhya, Vaisheshika, Vedika, Jainas, and Charvakas. Well, whether Jains belong among the Hindus or not is another matter. Here we are referring to the ancient non-Buddhist schools, India. So that's better called the Indian schools. We have already talked a little bit about Sankhya school before. The main points are similar. Self is existing separate from the aggregate. So they think the self exists separate from aggregates, and it is permanent, and it's called those characters. These beliefs are common to all these non-Buddhist schools. Even quite a lot of Buddhists still think like that. I experienced this. I didn't do a thing. I'm just doormat. I'm the doormat. Modern therapeutic community that's used this a lot longer. Oh, doormat. So it's not ancient Indian school. It's a modern problem. It's an everyday problem. So these are not some kind of ancient schools we are refuting. It's the modern day problem, cause of suffering as well. So it's not just people who are studying philosophy that have this problem. People who don't philosophy at all, totally deny religion. Their suffering is caused by these rigid views of thinking as there is a separate I, eyes that are separate from the aggregates, that who has this characteristic. But there are minor difference between them, and it's largely through this minor difference of accepting self that different traditions evolve. However, they all believe in the true and permanent existence of self that is separate from that aggregates. Even Christian teaching, they say that there's a soul or something that is permanent. And quite a lot of non-Buddhist schools, majority of non-Buddhist schools, when they go into final details. So that's the theory. That's the theory which we have to defeat. The theory of the existence of a self that is separate from the 5 aggregates, as view held by others. And that is presenting the notion. Now, second is presenting criticism. Now we have to refute criticism means how to refute them. 3 subdivisions. First, refuting the nature and characteristics through the syllogism known as the known to others. Second is refuting being separate from aggregates through the syllogism of not observed. And third is conclusion by negating the observed object of self-grasping. Of these, the first itself has 2 subdivisions, which are negating the basic nature and negating the distinctive characteristic. Firstly, Madhyamika aims to refute the nature of the characteristic of self that is imputed by this school through the syllogism known to others. This is one type of syllogism. The Prasangika Madhyamika, Madhyamika is the middle way. Middle way has 2. Prasangika Madhyamika is considered to be the highest of all, believes in the 4 types of syllogism. Both the Prasangika and Swatantrika Madhyamika schools accept 5 different 5 great reasonings. There are 4 syllogisms used by Prasangika in particular, and one of them is Shenla Chakpe Jepa, inferential syllogism known to the others. Means that the reasoning, syllogism really means reasoning, is reasoning that is known to others. So you use inferential reasoning as that is known to others. Here Chandrakirti is refuting others' theory using this reasoning. So he also uses that theory that is known to others. You can't refute others' views unless there are some concepts that are known to them, accepted by themselves. This is why outline heading says, refuting the nature and characteristics through the syllogism known to others. This has 2 subdivisions, negating the basic nature and negating the distinctive characteristic. First, negating the basic nature is shown by this verse, 122. Comes back to the example of the barren woman. Mosham putar kewa tangdrachi, tedar kyube dani yuminching. Dene nganzin tento, nene nganzin jikten to amerigla, dene konzopten yumais. But since it is unborn, just like the barren woman's child, this self is utterly unreal. So here he uses the analogy of barren woman. Barren woman has no child, so it's an example of non-existing. So she hasn't given a birth to a child. So he says ultimately also the self has never been born, Self has never been produced. How could barren woman produce a child? Likewise, self has never been produced. It cannot be regarded as the base for ego clinging, So how could you develop a clinging to a child that doesn't exist? Maybe that's the child we're talking about. An unrecognized child, my inner child. inner child. For even in the relative, it cannot claim existence. Yeah, even in the relative, you cannot claim existence of a child of a barren woman. Like a country that doesn't recognize dual citizen. They said they just wouldn't let you go because they don't recognize your damn piece of paper. Yeah, there were 2 children, 2 or many children like that stuck in some countries. Certain countries wouldn't let them, they wouldn't recognize the dual citizen. That's it. Full stop. So it's not recognized. Even in the conventional world, nobody would say the barren woman has a child. So one reason and 3 things are established here by this verse. The reason that is that this kind of self you are talking about was born in the first place. So that's that there is no such production of a child, of a person. This reason is accepted to the Sankhya school also. That is why this syllogism called known to others, known to others. Even the Sankhayas would accept this argument. That is why this syllogism called known to others. Makye pechir means because it is not born, because there's no proof it is produced. This is accepted to other schools. Even Sankhya and Vaisheshika schools and others assert that self is not produced. That is why it is said to be permanent, because they say it's not produced, because it doesn't need to produce, it's already there. Even more problematic, I think. It is not produced, but has existed from time immemorial, and it is permanent according to the other schools. It's getting worse. So the other school also accept not being born, not being born. So they already say it's not produced. They say it's not produced. Madhyamika is using that counter. They use the counter argument because you already said it's not produced. Madhyamika is using this reasoning of not being born to prove this point. So that's the syllogism, because you have to use their logic to prove them wrong, because you can't argue a syllogistic view that they don't accept. So they already say there is no self is not produced, and they try to say it's permanent. The only argument that they say this it's not produced is because it's permanent. It's already there. Now they have no idea how much belting is going to get after that. The more belting is going to come after that. Three things. So that's the first reason. That's the reason. One reason. Three things that is established here through this reasoning. First is that self does not exist. The self that you have imputed through these characters do not exist because it is not born, even according to you. So that's one. Secondly, it does not exist, just like the child of barren woman, and is not even the basis of grasping I. So there's nothing to refute. This self that you are talking about is not even the basis of grasping that I, because it is not born. All these theories they present regarding the existence of self are for the purpose of identifying the object of self-grasping or grasping I. And because you have to find a reference point to prove nothing. All worldly beings possess the grasping of self and self, the I. All schools, Buddhist and non-Buddhist alike, believe this. According to Madhyamika's middle way, one has to negate the object, but the object you negate must be object of self, must be the object of this self-grasping. You cannot say that self is the self that all living beings grasp as the self. Even when the dog grasps true existence of self, according to Sankhya school, the objects of dog's vision of self-grasping must possess all of these five characteristics. All of those five characteristics we discuss. Madhyamika is saying that since the self is not born, it cannot be the basis of grasping as at I, and that is the second point. Now, we come to a third point, which is that it cannot be asserted even conventionally. Since the self you are presenting was not born in the first place, it cannot be asserted. It cannot be said to exist even conventionally. These are the 3 points. Since the self which you have asserted is not born, it does not exist. It is not the basis of grasping at I, and it cannot be proven even conventionally, just like a child of barren woman. The example should be applicable to all the 3 things that are proved here. That negates the basic nature of the self by those 3 reasons. Now, second is negating the distinct characteristics. This is explained by the next verse, which is Kanjir tenju le te ke Mudi namye kanden tekun la, randa maji tenzi ki noba teji teki kuyenja yomayins. Indeed, the various aspects of this self, as heathen masters teach in all their treatises, are countered by their common maxim that self is unoriginated. Therefore, these aspects also are revealed as non-existing. So the counter-argument, The same reasoning is used to negate the 3 characteristics. In the first verse, Chandrakirti has negated the existence of self itself without touching on the characteristic of the self. The basic nature of self is negated because even the Sankhayas believe it is not born. Now, in this verse, the characteristics such as being as an experiencer, a permanent thing, a non-creator, all these characteristics likewise do not exist for the same reason, that is, they are not born. How could you have any of those characteristics when it's not born? By their common maxim means known to them. In other words, this reason is not the reason of not being born is also accepted by Sanghya school. Therefore, this is familiar to them or known to them. This reason of not being born first negates the existence of self as a basis, then negates all its characteristics. This completely refuting the nature and characteristics. So this is how thorough, going very point by point. Second is refuting being separate from aggregates through the syllogism of not observed. So this is talking about how refuting self being separate from aggregates because you could not observe the self, self that is other than the self beside the five aggregates, So this is a very important point. Which next verse? Kalte pungbo namle shen kalte pungbo namle shen pungbo tseni mebryu jigdenganzi loi dengdoya mendu teri mimba dakte chir. And thus there is no self existing separate from aggregates. Divided from the aggregates, there is no self to grasp. Once you disaggregate the five aggregates, there is no self that is standing there as the owner. You can't find it. The common man does not ascribe his sense of I to such a source. He does not know of such a self, yet he thinks I am. So that's the problem. I am. Without thinking, he says I am. The outline says refuting being separate from others through the syllogism of not observed. This is a very popular type of syllogism, a syllogism of not observed, meaning not syllogism in reason of not being observed. Not observed means not having seen. It is applicable to certain things, but not at all, not to all. It is also the main form of reasoning used by modern scientists, because they say they can't see. They can't see next life. It's not observed, which is a good point. So now the Buddhists are using this not seeing purpose, not observed rationale to say there's no self is observed. I don't know who will hear it, but we can argue that. Hopefully there's someone who will hear these things. Whatever is observed is accepted, Whatever is not observed is not accepted, you see. There is a circumstance in Buddhist philosophy where this reasoning can be used, but it is used only with respect to observable object or those that are worthy of observation. Of course, all things are not object to observation by the ordinary mind. Just because a thing is not observed by one particular mind, it cannot on that account be negated completely. This syllogism is used when it is said that self that Sankhya and other Hindu schools believe to be separate from aggregate is not true. There is no self that is other than the aggregate because it is not apprehended by any mind. When a sentient being, maybe scientists too, when a sentient being grasps the self is never cognized. It is never grasped as separate from the aggregate. Nobody has ever seen a separate self from the aggregate. No mind has apprehended or observed it. So if the self were to be separate from the aggregate, it should be observed by some minds, but no minds has apprehended it. Therefore, by the reasoning that it has not been observed by any mind, self is not separate from aggregates. So this is the first argument, yeah. The postulation of a self separate from aggregates, therefore, is invalid. It cannot be asserted as the basis of worldly I, a grasping mind. Even among human beings, not to mention animals and other beings, there are many who are illiterate, do not know that the self and aggregates are separate. They do not cognize them as separate, but still they cognize the self. They have the view of self, which means they have self-grasping. We have the example of a person who has self-grasping, but does not know that self is separate from aggregates. This means that self is actually not separate from aggregates, separate from aggregates, because one is mistaking the self with the aggregates. There definitely isn't a separable self from the aggregates. So that's why the five aggregates such important cornerstones of Buddhist philosophy, whether it's sutra or mantrayana or vajrayana meditations. It's so important to understand the concept of five aggregates. The English word aggregate is not too bad, because aggregate means composite, isn't it? It is compounded aggregates. Compounded, means many different things are put together and create. Whether it's a food or cake or carpet or any machine, even a pen is a compounded aggregate. Third is conclusion by negating the observed object of self-grasping. Because first was the notion, and then the characteristic now is actually negating the actual self-grasping itself. Kanda tundro kama kyalgyurpa teki maki tangde mantong la nganzi teda layan juktongde tena pungbo leshe dangal me. And we may say that beings born as animals for many ages never apprehend a self unborn and permanent. Yet they clearly have a sense of I, thus separate from aggregates, there is no self. This self imputed by Tirthikas as separate from aggregate is not observed object of self-grasping. Now, if you present a self, this self has not been observed object of self-grasping. Self and self-grasping go together like the visual form and eye consciousness, but according to this explanation, self will not be observed object of self-grasping. That is what this verse is explaining. All living beings, including animals, have self-grasping, but they do not understand anything about the characteristic these schools present. These characteristics are not known to countless sentient beings, but nevertheless still grasp an I. What worldly beings grasp as a self is not the self being imputed by these Tirthika schools, So it's going back to that, going back to negating the main point. Therefore, there is no self other than the aggregates. Yeah. This is a very good conclusion to reach. There's no. With this, we completed presenting criticism. So presenting criticism of the existence of the I or self that is separate from the aggregates. So that's one first step. Second is negating the existence of self as identical to the aggregate. Yeah. So if you can't find self that's separate from the aggregate, then whether you can now try to find self that is identical to the aggregate. So this is very thorough. This has two subdivisions. First is presenting the notion that they are identical. Second is that if they are identical, there will be even more problem, So they will have to have five, and so on. Even to having two similar ones, a bit of a problem to most people. Whether self is one or two, we definitely think it's one. This teaching is going to say zero, but some people not only they think it's one, they think they're two. Dual personalities. See, numbers and these finite numbers are a problem. Zero is no problem. So you want to go back to zero, then there's no problem. Yeah, presenting criticism. So firstly presenting the notion. This explained the word was. Yeah, 풍보 레신 다주 메데체 다데 mikpa kona 풍보 konaos 카직 다데 땡도 풍보는 ngaja양도 카직 셈식 does. The self that's different from aggregates does not exist. Now this is Chandrakirti is really saying self that that's different from aggregates does not exist. So because it's separate, there's no separate from. There's no self that is separate from the aggregates. That's almost like reiterating what has been made point in the previous verses. The referent for the notion I is thus the aggregate alone. So now we have eliminated all possibilities but the aggregates. You couldn't find the damn thing except the 5 aggregates. We looked everywhere. We have drones, we have sent all the spies everywhere. Couldn't find nobody, but we can only find the aggregates. So it's a very good conclusion. The referent for this notion I is thus the aggregate alone. Some believe the five together are the basis for the view of I, while others hold this basis is the mind alone. Who are these? Now this is within the Buddhist, the Samitiya school. Samitiya school is a school who has been honored by many, Samitiya school holds this view. When we talk about the views of the 4 schools, the lowest school is that of the Vaibhashika school. In Buddhism, they usually have 4 school of thought. Vaibhashika, Chedakmawa we call it. This mainly 2 are Theravadan schools, 2 are Mahayana schools. We've gone through all of them before, so I won't go. This school also has many sections such as Kashmiri Vaibhashika and Central Vaibhashika from Central India. So mainly to do with location. This Vaibhashika in general, Vaibhashika actually means particularist. In general, do not believe in these. Only one particular group is called Mangbokurvedeva. Mangbokurvedeva is the Tibetan word for Samayita, Samitiya. Believe that a self exists which is identical as aggregates. Yeah, self. I think we do, don't we? We also do. We are not a follower of Samadhiya school, but we also unhesitatingly say, I am my body. I have a commitment. I have an appointment. Yes. The left knee has appointment. The rest of the body doesn't need to go, but the whole body has to go with it. It's interesting. I'll send the left knee as a no, the whole body. All the 5 aggregates have to travel with the knee. This is the only Buddhist school that believes in the existence of a self. When it comes to this particular Buddhist school, self exists inseparable from the aggregates, They're trying their best, but they can't go away from their 5 aggregates, which is really like us every day, isn't it? Even though we theoretically may understand no self, but we just so stuck in the 5 aggregates, we just can't even separate the pages from the book. It's so stuck from the flood. From the flood. It's from the leak, in the library. All books. I had one of those. All my books are stuck. They wouldn't open. They wouldn't open it. It's like that. We wouldn't think of parting from aggregates. Self exists inseparable from the aggregates. It is the same as the aggregate. In other words, the observed object of the view of self is aggregates and nothing else. Yeah, nothing else. When you grasp the self, you are actually grasping the 5 aggregates. When you observe the self, you are actually only observing the 5 aggregates. That's why it's good to ask how are the 5 aggregates. Then your answer should be, I don't know, ask them. It would be a very good answer. I don't know, ask the 5 aggregates. When it comes to the definition of this self, the difference exists within this school. Some say the self is identical to the collection of the 5 aggregates, whereas others say, out of the 5 aggregates, only the mind or consciousness is the self. Now, they think the mind, the consciousness, which is the Consciousness is the subtlest of the five aggregates, isn't it? But that's why we call matter to consciousness, because the four aggregates are the matter, really matter. The fifth one is the consciousness. So, only out of the five aggregates, only the mind or consciousness is the self. And this is really thinking. However, anyhow, whether it is all the five aggregates or only the aggregate of consciousness, they believe that self is the same as the aggregate. So this is pretty much us, really. I don't know about the Samayita school. This is pretty much us, don't you think? Pretty much, even though we might say we follow the Prasangika Madhyamika or whatever, but we basically are stuck in these five aggregates, and we basically there until you realize, I suppose, unless you have a lot of merit and wisdom, you still think. So that's the concept, notion. Second is now criticism. Presenting criticism to the notion that self is identical to the aggregates has three subdivisions. First is the point that self is identical to the aggregates damaged by reasoning. So we give the reasoning. Second is the point that self is identical to the aggregate is not the meaning of the scriptures at all. So one that's just showing the Buddha didn't say that. So where do you get that? Third is the object of abandonment, and the antidote would be confused if the self were to be identical to the aggregates. Amazing. This is what they call reason rational. Chandrakirti. First itself has three subdivisions. Can you believe it? He's going detail. He's going to find the self in the single hair. The first is negating self and aggregates through analysis. This is two subdivision. The first is to be damaged by 7 extreme faults. The notion that self exists identical to the aggregates being refuted here. Firstly, it is done through reasoning. There are two main ways of negating the false notion. One is through logical reasoning, and other is through scriptural evidence. Scriptural evidence is applicable only to those who will accept the scriptures. It could not be appropriate to quote from Buddhist scriptures in a debate with the Hindu school. For example, if you debate with a scientist to quote from Buddha, naturally he will laugh at you. For you, logical reasoning is the only method that counts. So it's actually, Dalai Lama says this all the time these days. Lots of monastic dialectics always quotes Nagarjuna or somebody. But what if the opponent don't accept those people? Who the hell is that? Which edition? What is his date? And how long did he live? And we start saying he lived 600 years. Things like that. It's a bit difficult to prove. So all those kind of facts become bigger. So therefore logic reasoning is more important. Yeah. For him, logical reasoning is the only method that counts, and that's why it's a scientific logical reasoning. That is why there are two methods. However, if the opponent does accept the scriptural evidence, it is effective to use the additional two logical reasonings. Yeah, Madhyamika will negate this theory using both methods. Yeah, Madhyamika is quite capable of just walking on one foot. It will just use the reasoning. The first is through reasoning to be damaged by 7 extreme faults. This is now covered in the next two verses. Kalde pongbo dane techirte mangwe dagde teja mangburnyur. Dane zesun yurhing tertawa zelan jukpe chinje lomengyur. Nyangen detse ngepe dakchen yur. Nyangen dengu Kejik dalani, kenjik chibo mebe dendeme, shenji sala, shenji sawaran yur. So those two verses are. But if the self were equal to the aggregates, means to they're identical to the aggregates, it must since there are many, be a multiplicity. So there must be many selves. So it must be at least 5. And it would be substantial, visible like other things, Then the self would be all visible, and not at all a simple misconception. It couldn't be just like that. Nirvana, once attained, self would be extinguished, and prior to this, self would rise and vanish every instant. Without an agent, there would be no karmic fruit, or else the actions done by one would give result to another's reap. If one were to accept the self as identical to the aggregate, sevenfolds would ensue. So this is the very... Now, what are the sevenfold? First fold is that the self would become many. One who accepts the self as identical, the aggregates would have to accept 5 persons because there are 5 aggregates. Second is that the self is a substance. Tibetan word Dembratrupa. Dembratrupa means truly existing. Aggregates are considered as a substance, means truly existing substance. This means something that exists solidly, although not necessarily inherently existing. Even in the conventional view, things can be accepted as substantial. Substance and the entity are identical, substantial thing and imputed thing. Essentially, the non-Madhyamika Buddhist school believe that when a thing is imputed, 2 aspects are involved: basis of the imputation and the imputed thing. The basis of imputation is usually the substance. Without substance, there can be no basis. The collection of atoms consists of 8 types of atoms. If we add sound, it becomes 9. Otherwise, there are 4 main atoms that arise from the 4 elements. The collection of atoms is a substance. All these atoms are substances. That's why they can form a basis for the imputation of there being a pot. A pot is an imputed thing. It is not a substance. It is imputed on a substance of the atoms. The atoms are the basis of the imputation. That this is what is referred to as a substance, the basis of imputation. With regard to what is being negated here, self is not a substance. Self is imputed on the aggregates. If we say that self and aggregates are same, the self would also be substance. That would be a second fold. So that's the second fold. The third fold is the view that it is not wrong because it apprehends a substance. This is because, in the view of those schools, if the mind apprehends a substance, that mind is considered correct, it is not considered mistaken. If the mind apprehends an imputed thing, it is not considered correct. Since mind is the same as the aggregates, mind is a substance. Therefore, the mind that apprehends a self is correct mind. Self-grasping would not be wrong because it would be apprehending a substance. That's the third fold. The fourth fold is the self definitely ceases at the time of nirvana. So that's the second verse. This refers to the belief that even after nirvana, there is still rebirth. The Madhyamika school usually accept this belief, but many other schools believe that after nirvana, or you could possibly refer to this as the nirvana of the Buddha, there is rebirth. There's a difference, according to many Theravada schools. After the nirvana of the Theravada realized beings, there is no rebirth. There is complete cessation. It is not referring to that. Otherwise, they would agree with this. Madhyamika says if you accept a self that ceases at the time of nirvana, they would agree. In the case of nirvana of the enlightened being, the nirvana of Buddha, even the Theravada school believe that the Buddha would again come in many different manifestations. In other words, continue would not cease. This refers to the case of an ordinary practitioner who practices while having aggregates. Later on, he attains nirvana, his self-grasping is eliminated, and the self does not exist. However, there are 2 kinds of nirvana, which is why it becomes confusing. One is the nirvana when alive, and other is the nirvana after death. Nirvana with aggregates and nirvana without aggregates. This refers to nirvana without aggregates. When a Buddha passes on to nirvana, aggregate ceases, but his mental continuum continues. If the self and aggregates are considered identical, then just as aggregates cease at the time of nirvana, the self should also cease at the time of nirvana. This is the fourth fold. Fifth fold is in the Tibetan original, it is mentioned that the Kenjik, which means self would arise, Kye means arise, Jik means perish. In other words, self would be subject to birth and death, or production and disintegration in the moments prior to nirvana. That is the fact. That's the fact of the translation of the original. That is one fold, fifth fold. And another fold is that before nirvana, self exists, but before nirvana, aggregate arises momentarily. This means that they arise at one time and immediately disintegrate. Production and disintegrations are momentary. The same thing is not said about the self. If self and aggregates are considered to be same, then the self would be subject to momentary production, disintegration before nirvana. That is another fold, fifth fold. The sixth fold is chepo mepe tende me. Chepo mepe tende me means since there is no creator, there is no result. Since aggregates and self are considered identical, then self, like the aggregates, is also subject to momentary disintegration, decay, and production. Since it is momentary, it follows that a self that performed the action is no longer around when the result of action ripens. Let us say that in the previous moment, self performed a particular action. In the next moment, in the next life, let us say the result ripens. Now, at the time of result, when the one who has performed action is no longer there, because he is subject to momentary disintegration. Since there is no self that has performed the action, we cannot have the result of action. Since the self is momentary, it cannot perform any action. At the time of the result, agent is no longer there. Therefore, we have no self who is performer of the action. Since there is no agent, there is no result. This is the sixth fold. The seventh fold is that experience that one experiences what another has accumulated. Yeah. Here the self is considered the same as aggregates, yet the aggregates will be different in future lives. In the same way, this self and the self in the next life would also be separate or different. This means that one self has performed the action, another self will experience the result. This is as if the Devadatta performed the action and the Dharmadatta experienced the result. These are two different individuals. Yeah. Now again, they would say that it is the same continuum, but the theory of the same continuum is refuted because they are considered inherently separate. Since the aggregates in one moment and the aggregates in the next moment are separate, in the same way, the self is also separate from one moment to the next. So, if two selves are separate, this is like the one self performing an action, another who is not the same experience the result. If this is not so, it would be contradictory to the Buddha, to what Buddha said in the scripture, that is, whoever performs action will experience the result. That is the sevenfold, yeah? Sevenfold. So when we say that someone experiences a result, we're talking only on a relative level. When we say there is no self that is identical to the aggregates, we are saying only relatively. Ultimately, there is no self, let alone a separate one or identical one. There just isn't a self, full stop. Let alone one who creates and one who reaps. This is not even the creator. Creation itself doesn't exist on ultimate level, yeah? Ultimate level. So these are the seven extreme falls that would fall upon you. This is talking about the Buddhist school or people who hold similar views. If you were to accept the self as identical to aggregate, so that's why people can't move from suffering or karma, even though intellectually may understand emptiness, they still are so embedded with the aggregates. The aggregates of body or feeling is so self, and they just do not know how not to. Why? Because they haven't realized. And so this is why the view that one misapprehend the aggregate as identical to self, even though one thinks there's no self. Each aggregates are composite and they're so, but because of the karma and afflictions, in apprehending them has been so long ago, and it is still residue which is still lingering, and we are not quite able to have enough wisdom to get rid of. So that's why it's very important. It can empower us to develop compassion when we know this. Why this notion of emptiness is so difficult to apprehend and comprehend is because they have so much weight of karma and affliction from past habituation in believing those, having this kind of seven faulty views, not knowing them as faulty, and still, so therefore, the apprehending aggregate as self, as identical, and not separate. Of course, not separate was not able to, because one is so much in the aggregate, and even try to be Buddhist, one still suffers. So therefore, we can develop compassion to our past and our present self, non-existing present self, and others who are also in the deluded perception, thinking they are identical to the aggregates. They don't see this as the cause of the faulty kind of faulty view. This faulty view gives them no freedom from suffering, even though they don't want it. This faulty view doesn't give them freedom from this view, even though they wanted to learn the right view, until their merit and wisdom kicks in. So therefore, the slowness of getting the merit and wisdom is because of the numerous faulty views that is so difficult to apprehend. And so here Chandrakirti is highlighting these seven faults as the most important one to be able to consider before one actually goes to reject them with the counter argument. We'll stop there.
How is it that we've fallen asleep to this wisdom? It's so habituated or solidified in the mind stream. How has that occurred?
We didn't.
We didn't.
We didn't, but we did. We didn't, but we did. It's the karma and habits of grasping to the self like this is so hard to be detected by any philosophical teachings. Most of them are following ways of any spiritual path that goes not near finding the right view. They're all worshipping someone to liberate them, or someone to guide them, and someone to give them salvation. And the question of then there being no self who needs salvation never comes in their mind. They know they need salvation. So stop. And they know they are truly existing, and they're just suffering, and they can't handle this, and they want salvation. They never even think salvation is not the problem. The problem is you thinking it's you need salvation.
It's really hard to comprehend though, because if there's no self, what receives the karma? And if there's no self, what is the mind stream?
If there is no self, which if we realize, none of those is a present problem. The reason we have not realized that is because of that we have misapprehended self with aggregates, and therefore we have created so many karmas, And on a relative level, we have all these problems. Ultimately, there's no problem. We have never done anything wrong.
So relatively there is a self.
Huh?
Relatively there is a self.
Oh yeah.
Karma and
Has
a mindset.
Yeah. These teachings are all on ultimate level. Never on relative. This teaching is just this teaching is ultimate level. This is what the view of the enlightened one would have. But we who are on a relative level, who is not enlightened, even though philosophically may share some of the views, but we don't have the advantage of the high view. Even though we may philosophically understand, but we are so habituated in believing self with the body, self with the feelings, self with the history, and we do not know how to de-lump it. It's been lumped so long time ago. And so this teaching are taught, these are just the views of those who are staying in these high stations of enlightenment. Those bodhisattvas who have those high level, they see how high beings are mistakenly grasping themselves with the body and the name and the gender and experience and so on, and likes and dislikes, and they just say, why me? They haven't questioned. They don't question about the me. They just question why the things happened. And because they have no way to understand this, and so they have to first of all apprehend the true origin of the suffering in the relative level. Ultimately, there's no suffering, so don't worry. But ultimately, I'm not saying anything. Ultimately, Chandrakirti wrote nothing. There wasn't Chandrakirti. But relatively, Chandrakirti realized all these people languishing in this world and thinking this, thinking me, thinking that, and so caught up in duality. Therefore, he was so compassionate to these children lost in the thicket of samsara, believing in me and my problems, and others as the problems and the cause of the problem. They don't know the problem is believing I am. And this nobody teaches. And therefore, every other schools of thoughts who taught there is liberation, there is salvation, there is I, there is a permanent soul, and all of those views they're dealing with one step by another, and in order to get firstly conceptual framework of how this works, and then later on we might get some kind of glimpse of true contemplative realizations. First one must become familiarized with these concepts and these ideas and become literate in these ideas. We should be literate in Madhyamika philosophy, in its ideas, and then develop compassion who are illiterate, and then see the suffering caused by illiteracy of the teachings. And how due to lack of these wisdoms, their eyes are closed and never opened. So therefore, may there be light, so that they can understand this. And of course, studying this kind of texts, and people who have taste to study these texts and consistently, faithfully, will be very few. Majority of people say, why we have to study these texts? Why don't go straight introducing the nature of the mind or something like that? They don't realize how much of this thinking actually clarifies subjective mind of all these fallacies, and then develop profound compassion to the past self and other selves who are in that languishing in that sorrow and not being able to free themselves from suffering by learning there is no self. And then philosophically there is no self, but behaviorally practice selflessly and serving others, as if there is no this self that has any agenda other than to serve others to allay their temporal difficulties. Oneself has no real other agendas anymore, as in the past. In the past, there were lots of things to do. Now, there's only one thing to do: to serve others selflessly and bodhicitically. And in the meantime, that's all it really matters. That all matters. So it's not denying there's no self and treat everything nothing and then disregard. That's nihilism, of course. That's exactly the view we wanted to protect people falling from the mountainside road. That's why they put all these road blocks on the side of the mountain so that the people don't fall off the mountains. Yeah, they have some block here, and then there's a gap, and there's a block. They should put blocks continuously. Maybe they're trying to save some concrete. Maybe road department doesn't have enough budget to build a wall all along. Yeah, it's trying to create hindrances for suffering. This text, they're trying to create hindrances for suffering. Very, very compassionate text. Okay, thank you very much, everyone. With this, we'll conclude here. Thank you for your attendance and attention. We'll do the dedication of